Let's try this. Are we getting sound now?
Okay, get that out of the way. Look right underneath there. Talk and see if you get
Okay.
anything.
Let's see. Are we getting any sound now? I think we figured out what we were doing wrong. Come on. There we go. All right. There we go. Sorry about that, folks. I thought I had it all set up the other day, and apparently, no, we didn't. We made some changes, and apparently those affected a lot of things. All right, so here we are. We're here. We have sound. Since I was talking apparently into a dead mic, I'll go ahead and repeat what I was saying. We're going to be wrapping up 1 Samuel today, and that's even though, as you can see from my slide here, that we got like 3-4 chapters to go. But it's as daunting as it looks. It's kind of just flowing to Samuel, 2 Samuel. There's not a whole lot of to just really just dig into. But anyhow, we're gonna wrap up this today. So I don't know if we're actually gonna go the full time, but next week, well, I might do kind of a one-off Bible study because I want to give some time to announce what our next book is going to be in church. I'm kind of looking at Colossians. I'm not 100% certain just at this moment, but I think that's where I'm going to go. But anyhow, until then, let's go ahead and let's have another prayer. Gracious Lord, we give thanks to you that we have this opportunity today to gather together in your word. We ask that you would continue to be with us and bless us as we study your word, and that we also ask that you would keep everybody safe during these next few days with all the weather that's going to be happening in our area. In your son's name we pray. Amen. All right, so let's go ahead and we're going to jump right into Samuel here. And let's start reading chapter 29. Now the Philistines had gathered all their forces at Aphek, and the Israelites were encamped by the spring that is in Jezreel. As the lords of the Philistines were passing on by hundreds and by thousands, David and his men were passing on in the rear with Achish. The commanders of the Philistines said, "What are these Hebrews doing here?" And Achish said to the commanders of the Philistines, "Is this not David, the servant of Saul, king of Israel, who has been with me now for days and years? Since he deserted to me, I have found no fault in him to this day." But the commanders of the Philistines were angry with him, and the commanders of the Philistines said to him, "Send the man back, that he may return to the place which you have assigned him. He shall not go down with us to battle, lest in the battle he become an adversary to us. For how could this fellow reconcile himself to his Lord? Would it not be with the heads of the men here? Is not this David of whom they sing to one another in dances? Saul has struck down his thousands, and David his 10,000s? Then Achish called David and said to him, "As the Lord lives, you have been honest, and to me seems right that you should march out with me in the campaign. For I have found nothing wrong in you from the day of your coming to me to this day. Nevertheless, the lords do not approve of you. Go back now, and go peaceably, that you may not displease the lords of the Philistines." And David said to Achish, "But what have I done? What have you found in your servant from the day that I entered your service until now, that I may not go and fight against the enemies of my lord the king?" And Achish answered David and said, "I know that you are blameless in my sight as an angel of God. Nevertheless, the commanders of the Philistines have said, 'He shall not go up with us to the battle.' Now then, rise early in the morning with the servants of your lord who came with you, and start early in the morning and depart as soon as you have light." So David set out with his men early in the morning to return to the land of the Philistines. But the Philistines went up to Jezreel. Okay, so chapter 29 here is happening concurrently with Saul's actions back in chapter 28. So, when he was meeting with the medium and Endor and the like. So we've, I guess you could say we've gone back a little bit in time, but anyhow, the point is that we're now dealing with what's happening on the other side of the line, at with the excuse me, with David and all those folks, as well, we're just basically catching up with David here. Now, it is interesting that as the Philistine leaders are gathering together and they're doing their muster basically, so that this is where that you're getting all your army guys together and you're counting your men to see who you have, and this way you can figure out what you can do. Well, they're checking out each other's armies, and it's not surprising that they would notice there's David. And it's also not surprising that these guys would be a little bit, how shall we put it, miffed at the idea of David being a part of all this. As they note, isn't this the same David of who the people of Israel sing that he's killed his tens of thousands, and particularly referencing the deaths of Philistines? But Achish is like, well, he's been loyal to me. Of course, if you recall from last week, he wasn't exactly loyal to Achish. He was really playing the double agent. And even as he was telling Achish about all these raids against the people of Israel that he was doing, he was raiding other Philistines. Maybe these guys had an idea that this might have been happening. I don't know. Maybe they just decided that he's just a little too trusting. Your guess is as good as mine there, but what we can say definitely is that they're aware of what David did do before he came over to Achish. So, yeah.
Let's face it, if Osama bin Laden came over and said he was going to fight for us, would we trust him?
Yeah, as Julia was just commenting, I don't know if the mic picked it up. If Osama bin Laden came over and said he was going to fight for us, will we trust him? I think the answer is pretty solidly no. Even when we had people defecting during the Cold War, we didn't exactly trust them with military secrets. They spent a long time in the care of the CIA and other intelligence folks. And even then, after they were released to the general public, they kept an eye on them. Because as much as you're happy to have people come over to your side, you're also not going to trust the very people who are your enemies. But anyhow, Achish, though, he really shot himself in the foot as he presented David as Saul's servant. That's not exactly how you're going to win friends and influence enemies, If you got a person that they're definitely going to be kind of a little worried about, introducing him as your enemy's servant isn't going to go well.
Maybe meant to be reassuring. Oh, look, I have, someone who's a spy.
Yeah. Maybe meant it to be reassuring. In some ways, I don't think the author of 1 Samuel here really paints Achish in a great light. And he makes Achish seem very naive. And it could be that he actually was. And I would suspect David picked him intentionally. And as we've seen elsewhere, David's fairly skilled at court intrigue. So to be able to do this would, be kind of fitting. All right, anyhow. So the leaders end up prevailing over Achish, and they have him send David away. And the reason I find is, as I mentioned last week, is very ironic in that Achish made David the keeper of his head, and the the Philistine leaders are like, we don't want him to become our keepers. We don't want him to take our heads. So yeah, they send David off. Now, let's see here. When David and his I'm sorry, I misread my own slide here. This is going to bring us into chapter 30. Now, when David and his men came to Ziklag on the third day, the Amalekites had made a raid against the Negeb and against Ziklag. And they had overcome Ziklag and burned it with fire, and taken captive the women and all who were in it, both small and great. They killed no one, but carried them off and went their way. And when David and his men came to the city, they found it burned with fire, and their wives and sons and daughters were taken captive. Then David and the people who were with him raised their voices and wept until they had no more strength to weep. David's 2 wives also had been taken captive, Ahinoam of Jezreel and Abigail of the widow of Nabal of Carmel. And David was greatly distressed, for the people spoke of stoning him, because all the people were bitter in soul, each for his sons and daughters. But David strengthened himself in the Lord his God. And David said to Abiathar the priest, the son of Ahimelech, bring me the ephod. And so Abiathar brought the ephod to David. And David inquired of the Lord, shall I pursue after this band? Shall I overtake them? He answered him, pursue, for you shall surely overtake and surely rescue. So David set out, and the 600 men who were with him, and they came to the brook Besor, where those who were left behind stayed. But David pursued, he and 400 men. 200 men stayed behind, who were too exhausted to cross the brook Besor. They found an Egyptian in the open country and brought him to David. And they gave him bread, and he ate, and they gave him water to drink. And they gave him a piece of cake of figs and 2 clusters of raisins. And when he had eaten, his spirit revived, for he had not eaten bread or drunk water for 3 days and 3 nights. And David said to him, to whom do you belong, and where are you from? He said, I am a young man of Egypt, servant of an Amalekite, and my master left me behind because I fell sick 3 days ago. We had made a raid against the Negeb of the Kerethites, and against that which belongs to Judah, and against the Negeb of Caleb, and we burned Ziklag with fire. And David said to him, will you take me down to this band? And he said, swear to me by God that you will not kill me or deliver me into the hands of my master, and I will take you down to this band. And when he had taken him down, behold, they were spread abroad over all the land, eating and drinking and dancing, because of all the great spoil they had taken from the land of the Philistines and from the land of Judah. And David struck them down from twilight until evening of the next day, and not a man of them escaped, except 400 young men who mounted camels and fled. David recovered all that the Amalekites had taken and rescued his 2 wives. Nothing was missing, whether small or great, sons or daughters, spoil or anything that was taken. David brought it all back. David also captured all the flocks and herds, and the people drove the livestock before him and said, this is David's spoil. Then David came to the 200 men who had been too exhausted to follow David, and who had been left at the brook of Besor. And they went out to meet David and to meet the people who were with him. And when David came near to the people, he greeted them. Then all the wicked and worthless fellows among the men who had gone with David said, because they did not go with us, we will not give them any of the spoil that we have recovered, except that each man may lead away his wife and children and depart. But David said, you shall not do so. My brothers, with what the Lord has given us, he has preserved us and given into our hand the band that came against us. Who would listen to you in this matter? For as his share is who goes down into the battle, so shall his share be who stays by the baggage. They shall share alike. And he made it a statute and a rule for Israel from that day forward to this day. When David came to Ziklag, he sent part of the spoil to his friends, the elders of Judah, saying, Here is a present for you from the spoil the enemies of the Lord. It was for those in Bethel, in Ramoth of the Negeb, and in Jatir, in Aor, in Siphmoth, in Eshtemoh, in Rakal, in the cities of the Jerahmeelites, in the cities of the Kenites, in Hormah, in Borashan, in Atak, in Hebron, for all the places where David and his men had roamed. Huh. I think I'll give that reading to the elders one of these days for a church service. I can hear all the elders now going, yeah, I'm not reading that day. All right, so what happens is we got the Israelites and the Philistines going off to war, and the Amalekites decide they're going to play tiger baiting. Tiger baiting is a term that is used for playing two enemies off of each other so that you can attack the victor who has been weakened by somebody else. So while they're all off fighting each other, the Amalekites decide, hey, we're going to go and raid them both. We're going to go steal their stuff. And it would have worked if Achish had not sent David home early. Because if they hadn't sent them home early, they wouldn't have probably been able to catch up with them at least that quickly. But as it turns out, they of course they don't exactly get away. But anyhow, what we have is the Amalekites. They end up raiding the region of the Negeb and Ziklag, and this does appear to be a raid that was an attempt to capture slaves. As the author records, they didn't kill anyone. So this definitely seems to be one of those raids where they're going to go and just grab a bunch of slaves and steal everything else that they can. And if it's not nailed down, they're gonna take it. It's almost akin to what the Norse would call going a Viking. Those typically ended up with also a lot of killing too. And to be honest, I am a little surprised that they didn't kill anybody. Because even if when you're trying to go and just capture a bunch of slaves, somebody's going to fight back, and its chances are pretty good. Somebody's going to, die. But
I guess God was protecting them.
Yeah, God was good in protecting the people, and at least sparing their lives. David, being the awesome guy he is, he's not going to let this stand. And to be fair, I can understand why the men with David were upset. I mean, if I came home and found Julie and the kids have been kidnapped, hell hath no fury to equal how I would feel. I haven't actually seen this movie, but this one particular scene has become so famous. And it's the movie Taken. It stars Liam Neeson, and there's this one scene after he's found his daughter's been kidnapped by these guys. Liam Neeson's like this super awesome ex-spy or something like that, and he gets the phone call from the people who's kidnapped his daughter, and he just informs them that he has special skills and he's going to use them against them. Sounds very threatening when he just says it. That's David. That's how David's men were feeling. They're not really happy.
I was thinking, when you're a hotshot military band like that, I mean, this is what you do to others, actually.
Yeah, when you're a hotshot military band, this is what you do to others. I'm honestly thinking, Yeah, these Amalekites didn't exactly do their math well. I mean, attack David, attack the city that he's controlling. That's probably not going to end well for you.
Maybe they didn't know.
It could, yeah. And then their spies weren't very good. The comment was made, maybe they didn't know.
Maybe all they knew is all the fighting men are gone. Let's go for it.
Yeah, all the fighting men were gone. Let's go for it. Yeah. Um, anyhow, so understandably, those guys are upset. Now, here again, the author is going to demonstrate the difference between Saul and David. As remember, Saul would just go off and do things and then maybe consult with the Lord later. David starts off by consulting with God. He asked Abiathar for the ephod so that he can inquire: should he go after these people? Would he be successful in getting the people back? And God does answer, and he reassures him that okay, so yeah, go after him. You'll be successful. You'll get everybody back. And after getting that reassurance, David does head out, and they catch up with those raiders. Um, they manage to get some information from a slave of one of the raiders, and they're going to go after him. Now, we should note there's 200 men who cannot continue the chase. Exactly what's going on here is not entirely clear. So on the one hand, the author does tell us that, hey, these guys are they're going to be the baggage handlers. So these are the rear echelon folks. The people that are going to handle logistics. No, it's highly likely that these guys were fighting men also, and it seems like everybody in David's merry little band could take up arms. These guys just, for whatever reason, also happen to be, as the writer said, too exhausted to continue on. Don't know what's going on there. It could be they had come home and then they turned around right on this forced march, and they probably pushed pretty hard. And so, they had anybody who was, not feeling well or on the older side or is badly out of shape as I am, they probably couldn't continue on. So anyhow, he leaves those guys behind. They head off. They go and retake everybody. And David and his men, well, they have quite the thorough vengeance against the Amalekites, destroying the complete band except for the guys who managed to escape. And yay, joyful reunions. It's spoiled a little bit because some of the men who were with David, they don't want to share the spoils with those who fell behind.
Like the worthless ones.
Yeah, the worthless ones. Yeah. You notice the author has no opinions on those guys. Some worthless fellows decided that they shouldn't share their spoils. And David actually makes a rule that's gonna be really appealing to all the men who are ever going to fight for him. And that is, if you get selected to stay behind, you're not going to miss out on your share of the spoils. And that, let's hear, and the commentary that I was using, he notes this is the first law that David decrees as king. So, and it's one that's going to, make friends. And so all the guys, they get all their wives and their children, and plus they get a lot of other stuff for all the troubles that they went through. And of course, as we know, David makes his first law as king. And this is going to become even more clear as we're going to go back and we're going to hit some stuff that we missed while we're off chasing after these guys. All right, 1 Samuel 31. Now the Philistines were fighting against Israel, and the men of Israel fled before the Philistines and fell slain on Mount Gilboa. And the Philistines overtook Saul and his sons, and the Philistines struck down Jonathan, Abinadab, and Malchishua, the sons of Saul. The battle pressed hard against Saul, and the archers found him, and he was badly wounded by the archers. Then Saul said to his armor-bearer, "Draw your sword and thrust me through with it, lest these uncircumcised come and thrust me through and mistreat me." But his armor-bearer would not, for he feared greatly. Therefore Saul took his own sword and fell upon it. And when his armor-bearer saw that Saul was dead, he also fell upon his sword and died with him. Thus Saul died, and his 3 sons, and his armor-bearer, and all his men on the same day together. And when the men of Israel who were on the other side of the valley and those beyond the Jordan saw that the men of Israel had fled, and that Saul and his sons were dead, they abandoned their cities and fled, and the Philistines came and lived in them. The next day, when the Philistines came to strip the slain, they found Saul and his 3 sons fallen on Mount Gilboa. So they cut off his head and stripped off his armor, and sent the messengers throughout the land of the Philistines to carry the good news to the house of their idols and to the people. They put his armor in the temple of Ashtaroth, and they fastened his body to the wall of Bethshan. But when the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead heard what the Philistines had done to Saul, all the valiant men arose and went all night and took the body of Saul and the bodies of his sons from the wall of Bethshan, and they came to Jabesh and burned them there. And they took their bones and buried them under the tamarisk tree in Jabesh, and fasted 7 days. All right, so apparently while all this was going on with David and his men, the Philistines, they begin their attack against the Israelites, and they're quite successful. They overrun the camp. During which time all of Saul's sons are killed and struck down, and Saul is wounded. And Saul, seeing what is happening, commands his armor-bearer to kill him. And then when the armor-bearer refuses, Saul takes his own sword and falls upon it. Saul, he commits suicide. And after all the battles happened, the Philistines, they find the body, they find his, and they take his armor, they cut off his head, they place the armor in a Philistine temple, and they hang Saul's body on a wall, which is a common thing to do with one's enemies, and a way of declaring victory, and it's also something of an intimidation against them. Look what we did, and how we're humiliating your vaunted king now. And we do hear that some of the men of Israel, that when they find out about that, they stage a raid of their own, and they take back Saul's body, and they burn his body so that the Philistines cannot defile it anymore. So this brings to an end Saul's reign. He started out on shaky ground, and he's now ending in a very ignominious way. Second Samuel is, of course, going to pick up with David reigning as king and taking over for Saul. But until then, we're going to be moving on into the New Testament, because I like trying to do alternate between Old Testament and New Testament, keep things a little on the fresh side, so to speak, and also just give us a better overview of the scriptures. As I was saying earlier, it looks like I'm going to try and go into Colossians. Maybe I said that when the mic was still dead. We're gonna do Colossians next. We'll start that, I think, in 2 weeks. I'll have something of a kind of a one-shot Bible study next week. That way we can announce this and let people know who weren't able to tune in today. So please be aware that is going to happen. Also, just a really quick announcement in that keep your ears open. We don't know what weather and road conditions and all that good stuff are going to be like come this Wednesday. Um, I know we're looking at some more stuff coming today, and so with that in mind, keep your ears open. We might. I'm hopefully we'll be able to have services in person on Wednesday, but there is that chance roads might still be bad enough that we might think it's a little too unsafe for folks to come in. So we want to be aware of that and cognizant of it. So please be aware that is going to happen. And with that, unless there's any questions, we're going to go ahead and sign off, and I'll see you all. Well, I guess I should say see you all in the divine service.
Go for it,
With that, let's close in prayer. Gracious Lord, we thank you for this time. We thank you that we have this technology to use, and we thank you that it worked for the most part. And we ask that you would continue to bless us and keep us all safe as we gather in service. In your Son's name we pray. Amen.
Right. Make it. Click over to the next slide, Keith. Alright, count to 30. How many frames have you dropped?